Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you out here today. My name is David Nutbeat. I am the Digital Learning Administrator for Prairie Spirit School Division and the chair of this year's BYTE conference. Welcome, everyone, for joining us for BYTE 2021. As I sit here in my physically distanced classroom, as many of you probably are, we can all attest that it has been an epic year so far. I hope that epic video got you fired up and ready to go. Although things have changed for this edition of the BYTE conference and we find ourselves in a virtual setting instead of in person, we hope that this edition will be as valuable and memorable, dare I say epic, for you all. Okay, I can hear you groaning in the background. Whatever the venue, whatever the method, the BYTE conference has worked hard to bring you the best conference and the best professional learning, despite the circumstances we find ourselves in. Because even though we may be apart, together we will learn. Joining us today is Daphne McMenemy, author and teacher, whose keynote address will show us how computational thinking can help students overcome obstacles and empower their learning through technology. We also have many talented and enthusiastic presenters who will help share their expertise and experiences with using technology to improve teaching and learning in the classroom, whatever classrooms might look like these days. But first, we are honored to have a number of dignitaries to give BYTE 2021 a great send-off for the day. Here is our Superintendent of Schools, our School Board Chair, and the Minister of Education.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Monge, Superintendent of Prairie Spirit School Division. Welcome to BYTE 2021. I hope you have a wonderful day of professional development and find some time today to reflect on all of the learning you have already done this year. Let's recognize and celebrate our progress. During the last 12 months, teachers have been challenged to adjust their practice. Innovation has been a necessity, and teaching with technology has been impossible to avoid. On that note, I wish you a relevant day of learning that supports your practice. Finally, I would like to thank all of our tech support staff for being instrumental partners through this pandemic year, and by extension, the BYTE Committee for planning and organizing BYTE 2021. As a superintendent, a teacher, and a parent, I want to thank all of you for your hard work. Enjoy your day.
Good morning. I'm Jan McIntyre, Chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the Prairie Spirit School Division. On behalf of the board, I warmly welcome you to this year's BYTE conference. We hope your learning will be beneficial for both your teaching practice and ultimately for your students' learning. Prairie Spirit Board has long been strongly committed to the use of technology in education as an important tool in bridging distance, actually for over 20 years. With a lot of perseverance, commitment, and the support of an amazing staff, what was once a vision has now become reality. Today, we routinely offer quality programming for students in their home communities so that students spend more time learning and less time on buses. And who would have guessed that we would have been ahead of larger divisions in a pandemic? But it's true. Over the last year, the expertise of our staff and students with distance learning has stood us in good stead with the transitions to remote learning. We are grateful to our staff, students, and communities for their willingness to adapt to changing scenarios and for their commitment to excellence in education. We are also grateful to our superb tech department who make all of this possible. They really are an amazing group, and we thank them for their amazing work. We also are grateful to them for their leadership and expertise in education across the province and for the work they have done to bring this BYTE conference together. We wish you a great day of learning.
Hi, I'm Cliff Cullen, Minister of Education. Good morning to all the staff at Prairie Spirit School Division who are taking part today in this year's BYTE conference. I'd like to take this time to acknowledge the tremendous teamwork, flexibility, and leadership you have shown this year. It is because of these efforts, students are able to navigate through these difficult times and still be in a position to be successful. As for today, I hope you're able to relax, have some fun, learn, grow, and enjoy the conference. I recognize you would prefer to meet in person. However, for the short term, these virtual meetings are the reality. Again, thank you for your hard work, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and please stay safe.
Thank you for your encouragement and well wishes for the day. We appreciate the support for teacher professional development and improving student achievement with technology. The BYTE conference is here because of the support of school divisions that encourage continuous improvement in technology skills for the classroom, skills which have become vital during this exceptional school year. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. Our keynote speaker is an author whose personal and professional experiences with technology has allowed her to empower her students and her teaching with computational thinking. Her first book, Gracie, tells the story of a young girl who unlocks a world of creativity and imagination where her teacher brings a robot into her class and introduces her to the world of coding. In her keynote, Hacking Through Modern Learning, she will explore the world of coding in the classroom and how it can change your teaching and engage your students to be thinkers and innovators, to be problem solvers and creators, and to create a growth mindset for successful learning and to allow students to explore and imagine with technology to make school an interesting and exciting place. With much more about this and much, much more, let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, you can see her right there, Daphne McMenemy.
Thank you so much, David. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and I will let you know that about 2 minutes ago, everything shut down in my house for anything with an internet connection. So we are back up. That is never anything that you want to happen literally 30 seconds before you're about to be broadcast live, but we're here. I made it. Good morning. I am so happy to be here at BYTE with you this morning. I loved the video. It was pretty epic, I might say so myself. And I am so excited to be here today to share my message. So my name is Daphne McMenemy. I am an author, a speaker, an educator, and a nerd. I have an undeniable passion for computer science and all things STEM. I love space, though I don't profess to know very much about it or understand anything about it. I did wander the Kennedy Space Center like a kid in a candy store 2 years ago, and it may have been the coolest place that I've ever been. I make marshmallow launchers and marble runs, and adding soundtracks to iMovies is my guilty pleasure. So, case in point, if it matters, most of those are made during quarantine when I literally had nothing else to do. And the dog is the only one who doesn't resist my nonsense, at least not with words anyway. And that last video is only a video I can play at a Canadian conference because otherwise nobody else would find it funny. And I mean, I find it funny. That's not to say that anybody here actually finds that funny. So I also like to watch YouTube tutorials on anything. In fact, our red-footed tortoise finds his newly knitted dinosaur sweater quite warm. And I'm raising a tiny human just like me. We create, we make, we invent. And this summer, we built a squirrel table and set up a security camera in the backyard to get close-up footage. During lockdown, we dropped 750 bouncy balls down the stairs just so we could see what would happen. You know, we're still finding bouncy balls all over the house, and somehow they're in cupboards. I'm not sure how that happened. She makes what we do look cool, but it's probably because she's 9. But I digress. We do what we do because it's fun to explore our world this way. We could have just thrown peanuts in the backyard, but what fun would that have been? And we didn't need 750 bouncy balls, but we really just wanted to see what would happen. And that's how my brain works at home and at school. Learning should be fun and engaging. Learning should be about discovery and creation. And learning should always lead to my two favorite questions. What happens if, and what happens when? And inevitably, those questions always lead to more learning and discovery, because the answer to those questions should always be, I don't know, let's find out. And when I started my career 16 years ago, I had the same mindset, try it and see what happens. 16 years ago, I walked into my first school on a Monday morning, and I was hired after the start of the school year. So I was clueless, but I didn't know it at the time. And as we all do, we go through the ups and downs of being a first-year teacher and not knowing if we're coming or going on any given day. We all remember that first-year teacher feeling, knowing everything and nothing. But as time goes by, you slowly start to get your groove and you get a handle on things. And as I find my groove, one thing continued to stick out. See, I had a different way of thinking than many of my colleagues. I marched to the beat of my own drum. But that's what we say about kids, right? It's the polite way of saying that there's just something about them that makes them stand out, or sometimes, if not usually, stick out. So I learned early on in my career that the march to the beat of their own drum kids found a way into my heart very quickly, because you can connect to the things that you can relate to. And I connected to these things because I could relate. I thought differently than many of my colleagues. I saw the world of learning very differently. I didn't understand the need for class sets of textbooks and endless paper supply for worksheets. I just thought I could accomplish the same tasks with a different level of creativity and authenticity. 16 years ago, I had no idea I was going to be standing here, well, in my office, sharing my story. So what is my story? Well, my story isn't unlike many of you here today. We're passionate educators. We're people who want to be better for our kids every day. We're lifelong learners, always looking for ways to make what we did today better for them tomorrow. And we believe in our kids, and we believe that they can do anything, and even when they don't. Well, actually, especially when they don't. And that's the teacher I was. Well, that's the teacher I am. I just happen to do it with technology thrown into the mix. You see, I play with robots. I teach my very young students to code. Why? Well, because it works. I teach math, language, science, social studies, you name it. I teach the curriculum with code. But it didn't start with code. It started with my love of technology. I loved those overhead projectors and those humongous tube TVs with the VCRs built in. That's what tech was when I started. And I don't know if that makes me old, but that was great tech. And what I remember most is those incredibly unstable AV carts where the TVs were all attached with that weird seatbelt type contraption holding it down. And we used to make videos with handheld camcorders, and we'd plug in 17 cables to watch them on those giant tube TVs. Then I remember we got something called an Elmo, which was a document camera, and it was sold to us as this new age piece of technology, but it was just a color overhead projector. But anyway, I used every new tech toy my school had to engage my kids. Well, that was until 5 years ago. Everything that I thought worked suddenly didn't. 5 years ago, what I had in front of me was a group of that kid. Sitting in front of me that year was the lowest academic group of kids that I'd taught. And a handful were what we referred to as major behaviors. And I cringe as I say that, because it's just not what we do. We don't look at kids by their label. And, the rest of those kids that year fell somewhere in between. There was the shy kid, the loud kid, the wanderer, pick a label, and they were mine. And the labels, terrible, terrible, terrible. But, we've all taught that kid. And they're labeled for various reasons, and we might even be the ones that have labeled them. And I know I'm absolutely guilty of that. But I was guilty of that until I experienced the difference between teaching the child and teaching the label. But remember, I am the march to the beat of my own drum kind of person. So naturally, that kid, these kids, I connected to them. I always had a prove you wrong sort of mentality when I believed in something so fiercely. And I was determined to flip those labels from negative to positive. I didn't want those labels to define these kids anymore. I needed to find out who they were on my own. But no matter what I did, I couldn't engage them. They seemed so disinterested in learning. They weren't passionate about anything, at least That's what I thought. No dusty overhead, Elmo, or tube TV was cutting it. And there was only so much I could do with my iPhone. I thought I tried everything, but there it was. That was my mistake. The labels they had been given in their very short educational career had caused so many people to underestimate them and to doubt their abilities. That was the year that I realized how detrimental that kind of thinking was. It's the year that I learned why underestimating the abilities of our students is the enemy of relationships and connections and learning. It wasn't that I had tried everything. It was that I wasn't thinking big enough. And how many of us are guilty of that? You see, I was surrounded by the mindset that the list of things that these kids couldn't do far outweighed what they could, and that these kids needed fixing in some way. But in fact, it wasn't the children that needed fixing. It was their environment that needed to change. I needed to change because I was building their environment. So one day I grabbed our school's iPad cart, and at the time I thought it was above them. I didn't think it would engage them because I was underestimating them. And then one day I discovered this green screen app, and it was all the rage at the time. And I'd been grasping at straws to get these kids to write anything other than a journal about their weekend. And I figured if I was going to teach the conventions of writing, why did it have to revolve around a journal of their weekend or a worksheet with a writing prompt? So we brought out this green screen. We had this big green cloth that we draped across the entire whiteboard of our classroom. We had it stapled and taped and everything. We brought in chairs. We had kids who had green on their shirt, flip their shirts backwards, inside out, so we could get everything ready. And I decided that we were going to let the kids choose their own adventure, because I figured if they had more choice and imagination and exciting things to write about, maybe they'd actually write. So they got to pick their backgrounds, and we took our photos, and this is what we came up with. And they wrote. They actually wrote. But more, they never forgot about that experience. And this was the beginning of what became the year that everything changed for me as an educator. Their excitement lit a fire within me, one that I hadn't realized until then that was slowly going out. It was almost as if I was reigniting, as if they were reigniting a passion in me that I didn't know I was losing, but I was doing the same for them. I was building a passion for discovery and exploration, a passion for learning. We started finding ways to explore math and literacy and science in ways that we hadn't before. And suddenly their interests were becoming more evident. Things that I'd unconsciously assumed they couldn't do, they were doing. They were learning. They were engaged. So I learned later that year about this EdTech conference, not unlike one like this. And I knew a little bit about coding, but I immediately thought HTML, Python, all of those words that don't really translate into anything I could bring into my grade 1 classroom. But I was interested. I was learning for the sake of learning. So I walked into a session one day and I sat down and I listened to this incredible educator standing there talking about coding in her classroom. And she would show these videos about these little robots, Dash and Dot, and all of these amazing curriculum connections she was making with her students, but they were in kindergarten, which astounded me. And the first thing I thought was, well, if she could get kindergartners to do this, surely I could figure it out and then I could bring it into the classroom, because as I'd learned, I wasn't going to underestimate them anymore. And I wasn't going to underestimate what this new learning could do for my hesitant learners. So she made connections to math through measurement. She had her robots traveling from point A to point B, and she had students measuring before and after to figure out how to get from point A to point B. They were measuring with non-standard units. They were measuring with rulers, things kindergartners aren't expected to do in Ontario. And she had her kids doing this. She had her kids writing stories about these robots. She had them building these elaborate scenes that these robots were traveling through. And then they were writing and telling stories about that. But it was not unlike the green screen activity. She was just presenting the same material in other ways. But what got to me the most was the soft skills. The background learning that was happening with her students was mind-blowing to me. So naturally, these robots were in my Amazon cart before I got home from the conference. As an aside, that was what I affectionately call my robot problem. You see, my husband has a closet and a half, probably 2, full of shoes, and I buy robots. We've come to a silent agreement. But robots. So I brought them back to the classroom. I'd never used them before. I had no idea how, but I was determined to figure it out. So I brought these boxes into the classroom and I opened the boxes with my kids. And when we sort of brought these out, there was something not intimidating about them. They had this immediate personality. And, you know, when you turn them on, they made sounds, they had lights, and there's a lot of oohs and ahs with the kids. But then came the big question. How do they work? So when they asked, my response was, I don't know. Let's figure it out. And that was the biggest learning for me. And that's when the biggest learning for them happened. When they were given the reins to figure it out for themselves, their attitudes started to change. Who knew that co-planning and co-teaching could actually mean with your students and not just your colleagues? Do you know what happens to your relationship with students when they realize that you believe in them and their abilities? Well, this was the year that I learned just how important that was. This was the year that I also learned to let go. I had to. How many teachers here are A-type, rigidly organized, concerned with time management, and need things just so? Or are you B-type, flexible, go with the flow? Most of us are somewhere in between. If you ask anybody I know, lead more to the A side on most days. But that year, I had to let go. I had to let go of the preconceived notions that I had heard. I had to let go of control, the control that I like to have over my classroom, how lessons would and should go. I had to let go of the fear of it all falling apart and having to start 3 steps back, usually 3 days before. And I had to let go of the fear of having to start over. And what I learned was if we wanted our kids to learn, we needed to move at their pace. And that was the year my philosophy changed. And I realized it was no longer my classroom, my community. It was our classroom. And mindsets change when we start looking at things as ours versus mine. And I learned that I really needed to listen and watch and respond, but it had to be in words and action. So that's when our coding journey started. Before playing with robots, we had to start at the beginning with some curriculum connections. And if I wanted to play with robots, as my colleagues affectionately described it, because I knew it would engage them, I needed to make sure that we weren't just playing with robots. So this is what I now call learning to code. And that's what we did. We learned to code. And eventually it turned into coding to learn. It took some time to figure out how to make that happen. It took research, but mostly it took experience. It took sitting back and watching and reflecting. And the further we went on this new path of learning, the more I realized just what was happening as a result. So we started with toys and string on our grid carpet. And the task here was to get from owl A to owl B and figure out the most efficient path. And you can see that we used 3 different color strings, and we had those discussions of what made one path more efficient. And then we would sit around our carpet and we would pose challenges with different objects. And what we did was we started adding more toys to the carpet to give students more of a choice. They were allowed to pick their own point A and point B, and they were allowed to discover on their own what made a path more efficient and less efficient, using directional language, using numbers, using math that they didn't know they were using. So we would then sit in a group around our carpet, and we would come up with challenges for our robots.
Dances listen to get to the dinosaurs, without fighting to the horse and the tree and the bush. Watch out, watch out, watch out.
So if you think about what's happening in those videos, yeah, sure, it looks like we're playing with robots, but the language involved, the sequential thinking, the spatial reasoning, the computational thinking, all of that was being built as a result of this one little robot on a grid with some toys. And then I had to give up a little more control. So I let them set up their robots themselves, and they came up with their own rules. And one of the rules we had that they helped us come up with was we never pick up a robot by the head. And in fact, as I was preparing for this keynote, I got a text message from a friend I used to teach her children, and she had told me that she had actually picked up the robot by the head, and both children yelled at her. And this was 5 years ago, and those rules are still in play. So we built a coding wall in our classroom, and the coding wall allowed the kids to come and go as they please. And it sort of allowed them to organize their thinking a little bit more. And then we built a robot cart where they could help themselves. And each morning we'd pull it out of the cupboard and set it up, and they knew exactly how to use it. They would go to that coding wall, they would take the materials that they needed, and they would come up with a plan. And I needed this to happen because while I knew the explicit learning was happening, this proved it. And so they came up with their plan and decided where the robot was going to start, where the robot was going to end, and how it was going to get there. Now, coding wasn't part of our provincial curriculum at the time. So I had to spend some time figuring out how I was going to be able to make those program connections. I'd scoured the documents, hoping to creatively turn old assignments into new ones with the addition of this new technology in the classroom. But what I was beginning to discover, however, was that the soft skills that coding was developing was the key to our success and engagement that year. My once completely disengaged 6-year-olds were excited about learning. They were becoming risk takers and problem solvers. They were beginning to communicate effectively, and they were persevering through challenges. All of this learning spilled over into everything else we did that year. So that year I had a little boy very disconnected. He actually spent most of his first years of school not talking. In fact, he didn't talk to me for the first 4 months of school. He was disinterested in anything academic or social, and he would sit for incredibly long stretches of time doing nothing if I let him. Now, the only thing I ever saw him really take an interest in is our little kitchen set that we had in the corner. And it was eventually what I used to bribe him to get anything done. You know, if you do this for me, then you can play. Bribery, we all do it. Not recommended, but sometimes that's all we've got. So we had these robots, and we were working through our spatial sense unit. And we were talking about describing location and movement, describe the relative locations of objects or people, and we needed to use positional language. And we were also working on movement on a grid. So I had this kitchen set, I had my disengaged friend, and I had to figure out how I could make these two seemingly completely disconnected things connect for him. So one night I went home, I grabbed a bag full of plastic, tiny little food from our toy set at home, and I found this little mini plastic shopping cart. So I used a pipe cleaner and some tape to MacGyver the shopping cart to our robot's head, and I brought it in the next day. I threw a bunch of plastic food on a Bristol board grid, and I handed my little friend our MacGyvered robot and an iPad, and this is what we came up with. See, the math and language involved in that activity was huge for him. He had to measure to move through a grid. He had to communicate how he moved from point A to point B. And he had to use positional language and directional language. And he had to do that with words. He had to speak. And he did. And then from there, he actually started to explain his procedures, his first I, then I, next I, finally I. And he was able to start teaching some of his classmates how to do exactly what he just did. Now, he definitely didn't get the code right the first time. They rarely do. But that's when the learning happens. That's when all the good stuff happens, the perseverance, the problem solving, those skills that every student needs to be successful. Brian Aspinall says, when a student codes for the first time, it rarely works as expected. But that's the moment that innovation and problem solving begin. And that's exactly what I watched happen. I lost count on how many times my little friend watched his robot drive through the entire grid of plastic food, but he kept at it. And the spatial understanding required to move that robot from point A to point B took a lot of time to build, and it wasn't going to come from staring at a textbook or a worksheet. So we added our robots to our Daily 5. And our Daily 5 program was a literacy framework used to build reading and writing skills. And I did that because it was how it helped show them that we weren't playing with robots, that it was learning. It helped them understand that they were learning as a result of using this technology. Now, they already knew it was math. That was the easy part. But connecting it to language was more of a challenge until I watched it unfold in front of me. After a few weeks, my little friend pulled me over during our Daily 5 block, and he said, "Look what I made." In case you haven't figured it out, I also forced my love of iMovies onto my students, and that was created by them. But if we look at this video and we think about the procedures that went involved, we had suddenly moved away from that how to make a peanut butter sandwich to explaining what he did in this task. And I had given out that assignment. Let's draw a picture and, bread and peanut butter and knife. And what do we do? But it was irrelevant to them because we couldn't even eat peanut butter at school. Well, suddenly he had something in front of him that he was bringing to life and able to write his procedures. And he was able to explain what he did in spoken words and in print. And for him, the spoken word is my priority. That's what I cared about. But the writing happened too. He used to pick up a pencil, not know how to spell a word, and he'd put the pencil down and give up because as far as he was concerned, the task was done, but not anymore. He wanted to teach people how to do this. There suddenly was rhyme and reason to his learning. So later that year, I took him to a student-led STEM summit, and my silent little rock star spent the entire day teaching others, older students throughout our entire district, how to code. And remember, he didn't talk for 2 years. So the opportunities to take risks, to learn to persevere in a way that we hadn't before was what brought out this little voice within him, literally and figuratively. It was with this change in our program and the change in our mindset where he began to believe in himself. And as a result, that changed our relationship. It built a connection, an understanding between him and I. When we underestimate what our kids can do, they'll usually, unfortunately, live up to that, because what reason do they have not to? But when you've built a safe space for learning, and until we redefine what it means to fail, this growth doesn't happen. And because we redefined what failure looked like in our classroom, they began to believe in themselves as much as I did. So we kept going down this path of learning to code to drive our literacy program. And it started to unfold everywhere. We built communities. We built communities about everything. And we added in our art elements, we added in our social studies units, we added in our science units. But now all of a sudden, we weren't just taking Kleenex boxes and cereal boxes to build things. There was a purpose to them. We would build these miniature maps and we would use our robots to travel through them. And of course, that brought in a whole bunch of math as well. We started to build an entire haunted house community for our bots to travel through. And again, those miniature maps, those communities that we built for our social studies units were built in such a way that our students could create algorithms so that they could move through these models. And then what happened from there was that they began to actually use these robots to tell and reenact their own stories. We would put objects on a grid and they would have to move the bots around, code the bots to travel through the grid. And then they would start to tell their story. And they would turn the story into code. So their story suddenly had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it was a natural progression once the stories were out to get these stories down on paper, because their ideas were no longer lost as thoughts in their head, because they were actually able to watch the stories come to life in front of them. And my once non-writers were writing, and my once non-readers were reading. And what came from this was editing and revising of stories, and as a result, revising and debugging their code. They wanted to build more complicated algorithms, so they added more details to their stories. And as they wrote their stories, they came up with more ideas. So they went back to their code to change the algorithm. It was cyclical. It was amazing. Were we playing with robots? Absolutely. Were we computer scientists? Yep. And we were mathematicians and authors too. So that same year, I had the shyest, kindest, sweetest, most compassionate kid you'll ever meet. She was the kid who followed every rule. She did whatever was asked of her, every teacher's dream student. And she followed the rules so closely that she wouldn't take any risks in her learning. She was so afraid. And I related to her because I used to be her. And I wanted to give her choices for things. But anytime I gave her a choice, she always said, I don't know. And she'd wait to see if I would sort of lead her in the direction of what she thought was the right answer. And we'd had these robots in our classroom for some time, but she didn't show much interest in them, or so I thought. She was scared to try this new thing. But what I wanted her to do was take a risk. That was something she did not know how to do yet. So much like my friend with his kitchen set and my bribing with the plastic groceries, my new friend loved to draw. So that was my ticket. That was her hook. So she started out by drawing stories. Then our robots would star in those stories. And little by little, she'd bring these stories to life through code. From there came fully written stories with characters, a setting, problem, solution, everything that as an educator we want to see in our writing. But let's not forget about the computational thinking and spatial reasoning that was happening in the background. So there's 4 key techniques or cornerstones to computational thinking. There's decomposition, pattern recognition, abstraction, and algorithms. Decomposition is when you break down a big task or problem, or complex problem, into smaller, more manageable parts. That's exactly what our coding was doing. We were taking these robots from point A to point B to C and D and eventually all the way to Z, but we couldn't just do that all at once. We had to break down this code into smaller pieces. Pattern recognition, looking for similarities among and within these problems. So that was easy. They discovered when they wanted their robot to do the same thing in different parts of the grid, that was a pattern. They could just repeat the code or loop the code. Abstraction is when you're focusing on only the important information and you're ignoring all of that irrelevant detail. And when they would set up their grids with all of their objects to tell their story, there was parts that they didn't need to worry about because their robot was not traveling through that part on the grid. And they started understanding that that was the irrelevant detail that they could ignore, abstraction. And then algorithms. Algorithms was developing a step-by-step solution to the problem, or rules to follow to solve the problem, procedures. And all of this was happening in one task. Write a story. All of this was happening when we were just playing with robots. Now, this same little friend, my never stray from the line kid, shy as can be, she went on that year to speak at a board-wide event where she shared her experience in her own keynote about the importance of coding. And she was 7.
When I was in grade 1, I didn't like going on a computer. It wasn't that much fun. I used to bring paper and crayons to the computer so I could draw pictures. I didn't like the iPads that much either. When Mrs. Money brought out the robots, I started to like iPads more. You could code robots with iPads. I liked coding with Dash and Dot and Rosebud and Sphere. It was really fun. Coding was tricky at first. We used the grid for Dash to travel to Dot. There was lots of things we had to think about, like which way to go on the path and make sure you don't crash into the obstacles. I learned that it was okay to make mistakes because you could just try again. I feel smart because when you start to code, it's hard. But then when you keep practicing, you get better at it. You feel happy and you feel like you want to keep doing it. It doesn't matter how old you are or what grade you're in because you can still be a good coder. Thank you.
We all have these kids. The kids who will always pick what they've always known. I feel smart. That's what she said. She took a risk. She took a risk because she felt safe. When we redefine what it means to fail, suddenly failure isn't so scary. So that year we started a coding club for 2 reasons. We had thousands of dollars in robots, and we had a group of kids who needed their energy focused on something a little bit different other than 40 straight minutes outside at recess. And I used to call it my land of misfit toys. You know them, and you could probably list their names right now. Our small friends who are still building their self-regulation, our littles who wander aimlessly outside, or kids who need a little bit more love and direction. That was my coding club. And we played with robots during our lunch hour 3 days a week. Now, our coding club wasn't a reward. It was a necessity. And we were exploring math concepts above and beyond their grade levels every single day. And we were making connections because suddenly their needs were being met. And they had a voice, and now they had a space. But beyond that, many of our kids started discovering a passion for something they never knew existed: computer science. So our club consisted of students across all grade levels from kindergarten to grade 8. But my favorite part was that we had every kind of learner in our club. We had our gifted students, we had our students on the spectrum, we had students with ADHD, and we had every learner in between. But our learners worked together on projects and challenges all the time. And you see, we see this in our classroom. We see the inclusive community of learners in our classroom because we've built that. It's our classroom. But these were students that I'd never taught. And that's what we still saw because it was the environment that created this community. And this is where I began to explore the soft skills that coding builds: perseverance, risk-taking, problem-solving, innovation, leadership, teamwork, communication, you name it. I was watching it happen right in front of me with a group of students who only knew one another from being outside on the playground. And I had colleagues say, kids like you because you like computers and you let them play with robots. No one ever says they love you because you're teaching them so much math and language in a way that engages them and allows their creativity and innovation to shine. No one said that. Now, it was just the robots, apparently, but that wasn't it. It was the process of this learning. It was giving up control. It was giving them control. Our relationships changed because it allowed us to move from me being the teacher in charge of their learning to them suddenly being in charge of their own. It wasn't the coding club. It was the relationship it allowed us to build in the process. So I eventually moved into kindergarten, and kindergarten is a world unto its own. In most schools, actually, kindergarten classrooms are even in a different part of the building. They're not with what I call general population. So at this point now, I'd had a couple years of coding experience under my belt, and I knew and I understood the benefits of computer science, but convincing others was a whole other feat. I was still playing with robots as far as many people were concerned. Many were of the belief that coding and computer science didn't have a place in kindergarten. They saw it as screen time. But these kids weren't consuming content. They were creating it. And as my friend Brian Aspinall says, we don't need a generation of coders. We need a generation of digital thinkers who might use coding to solve authentic problems. And so I wasn't creating a classroom of coders. I was fostering growth mindset, creativity, and perhaps most important, I was giving my students a voice. I was covering the curriculum by redefining the way that our students were approaching the tasks. The tasks never changed. I was modifying and redesigning tasks because suddenly this tech allowed us to do so. So much so that the tech actually began to allow for the creation of completely new tasks. It was the redefinition of our entire program, all as a result of playing with robots. So we started creating repeating patterns in our kindergarten program, and we were doing it with code. And the exploration of these patterns started to introduce us to geometry and characteristics of 2D shapes. I love that video. He created a square by creating a repeating pattern. That was huge learning. So we added our robots into our literacy centers, where we started exploring high frequency words, letter recognition, and all the while building essential skills through computational thinking.
And then forward, arm, forward. Okay, let's start. Ready, steady, go.
He cheers all the time. My favorite part of these videos is their smiles at the end and how proud they are of what they've done. So, beyond the literacy skills that we were building in these activities, we were learning about the value of our mistakes. So I continued to do my own research into what else teaching coding could do for our students. And that's when I learned that we were no longer actually learning to code. Somewhere along the way, that changed. We were coding to learn, and there's a difference. We were using code as a means to learn and explore math and literacy concepts embedded throughout our entire program. We were no longer building an algorithm for the sake of moving a robot from point A to point B. And I began to discover the infinite connections to our inquiry-based kindergarten curriculum and how important those soft skills were for their development as learners. So when we talk inquiry, we talk about one large topic, and then we throw everything in. And that brought us to our space inquiry. We started learning fascinating facts about every planet. We would read about astronauts, we wrote about asteroids, we built cardboard rocket ships, and we made our own giant solar system right on our classroom floor with styrofoam, paper, ton of paint, so messy. Then came the robots. So we see two kids playing with robots, right? But we also see a boatload of language involved, communication skills required to bring that task to fruition. But then there's sharing, there's understanding of my turn, your turn, and the perseverance. That definitely didn't happen the first time. And now let's break down the math for a second. There was measurement using standard and non-standard units. They were exploring the concept of constants and variables. They're creating computational representations of sequential events in kindergarten. And they were understanding relative location, building their own positional language. And the computational thinking involved is mind-blowing. But also, it was fun, it was engaging, and it was memorable. The more I integrated code through our program, the less time I spent at the photocopier and in front of my curriculum document, because these tasks were so rich that they required days to explore and understand. And it naturally allowed for those smaller tasks to grow into something much bigger and much more complex, all led by the students. For 5 years now, we've been playing with robots. For 5 years now, these robots have helped build mathematicians, authors, artists, and scientists. More importantly, we've become risk takers, problem solvers, and leaders in our own learning. We've learned to persevere, we've redefined failure, and we've come to learn that success isn't an endpoint. Success doesn't mean that we stop learning and move on to the next thing. It means that we take that learning and we keep going. Seymour Papert said, "The role of the teacher is to create conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge." And he believed that the best learning takes place when the learner takes charge. And isn't that exactly what this is? So I leave you with this. It is our responsibility as educators to give all of our learners experiences and opportunities to be innovative and creative, to develop problem-solving, leadership, and thinking skills required to be successful, but not A's on a report card successful, the kind of successful that makes them lifelong learners who seek out challenges, who persevere, and who are motivated by discovery and exploration. So what does that look like for you? Well, for me, it looked like playing with robots. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Really appreciate that message. I code a lot, and I really enjoy coding because in coding, failure is an option. And you can't learn if you don't fail. And creating safe spaces for kids to try again is really key to making sure that they're motivated and keep learning. So thank you very much for that presentation. And computational thinking is a key skill for the future. And with the current state of things, the more problem solvers we can have to leverage the power of computational thinking, maybe we'll solve some of our big problems that we're facing today. So thank you very much for your powerful message. Really appreciate it. I can do the clapping. Okay. So on behalf of the BYTE conference, I would like to thank you for presenting today and providing us with a lot of information to use computational thinking and coding in the classroom. The stories and technique will allow all of us to begin thinking about how we can use them in our classroom and our practice. And I'm sure you sold a bit of robots today. So good job. Let's talk robots. But, in any case, we have, as a small token of gratitude, I have a gift I'm going to give you. So here you go. Here's the gift from the BYTE conference. Hopefully that is to your liking. Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. So thank you for that. Thank you again for your presentation, everyone. I can hear you. I hear you in the distance clapping. So thank you very much, Daphne. Appreciate it. All right. We have a bit of housekeeping. First of all, a little announcement that the session Running Lean with Design Thinking for Tech Education with James Warren, that is section 1F and 4D. James Warren had a sudden emergency that he had to deal with, so those sessions will not run today. My apologies for that. He tells us that he will be sending out a package for participants, and so you should get things from him shortly. Apologies for that. We just got that notice this morning. So, all right. So that's it for announcements for now. Just a reminder, the rest is up to you. Okay. In a few minutes, your sessions are going to start. You've been sent links to your presentations in your calendars, and your sessions will begin at 10:10. So you got a few minutes to get a refreshment, go for a potty break, things like that. So get to your sessions and learn a lot. Okay. Just a reminder that we have door prizes, and the door prizes are going to be revealed at 1:10 back on. We have another live stream set up for that. Please tune in to see if you have won. Also, please feel free to share your experiences of BYTE 2021 using the hashtag BYTEMB on Twitter. We are at BYTE Conference if you want to message us as well. And thank you very much. That is the wrap for the beginning of BYTE. Thank you for joining us for the opening of BYTE 2021 and the keynote address. Have a great morning, everyone, and I'll see you soon.